Chapter 16 of She. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nick Gisburn. She, by H. Rider Haggard. Chapter 16. The Tombs of Kor. After the prisoners had been removed, Asha waved her hand, and the spectators turned round and began to crawl off down the cave like a scattered flock of sheep. When they were a fair distance from the dais, however, they rose and walked away, leaving the Queen and myself alone, with the exception of the mutes and the few remaining guards, most of whom had departed with the doomed men. Thinking this a good opportunity, I asked She to come and see Leo, telling her of his serious condition, but she would not, saying that he certainly would not die before the night, as people never died of that sort of fever except at nightfall or dawn. Also she said that it would be better to let the sickness spend its course as much as possible before she cured it. Accordingly, I was rising to leave, when she bade me follow her, as she would talk with me, and show me the wonders of the caves. I was too much involved in the web of her fatal fascinations to say her no, even if I had wished, which I did not. She rose from her chair, and making some signs to the mutes, descended from the dais. Thereon 4 of the girls took lamps, and ranged themselves 2 in front and 2 behind us, but the others went away, as also did the guards. "Now," she said, "wouldst thou see some of the wonders of this place, O Holly? Look upon this great cave. Sawest thou ever the like? Yet was it, and many more like it, hollowed by the hands of the dead race that once lived here in the city on the plain. A great and wonderful people must they have been, these men of Kor, but like the Egyptians, they thought more of the dead than of the living. How many men, thinkest thou, working for how many years, did it need to the hollowing out this cave, and all the galleries thereof?" "Tens of thousands," I answered. "So, O Holly, this people was an old people before the Egyptians were. A little can I read of their inscriptions, having found the key thereto. And see thou here, this was one of the last of the caves that they hollowed." And turning to the rock behind her, she motioned the mutes to hold up the lamps. Carven over the dais was the figure of an old man seated in a chair, with an ivory rod in his hand. It struck me at once that his features were exceedingly like those of the man who was represented as being embalmed in the chamber where we took our meals. Beneath the chair, which, by the way, was shaped exactly like the one in which Asha had sat to give judgment, was a short inscription in the extraordinary characters of which I have already spoke, but which I do not remember sufficient of to illustrate. It looked more like Chinese writing than any other that I am acquainted with. This inscription Asha proceeded, with some difficulty and hesitation, to read aloud and translate. It ran as follows. "In the year 4259, from the founding of the city of Imperial Kor, was this cave, or burial place, completed by Tisno, king of Kor, the people thereof and their slaves, having laboured thereat for 3 generations, to be a tomb for their citizens of rank, who shall come after. May the blessings of the heaven above the heaven rest upon their work, and may the sleep of Tisno, the mighty monarch, the likeness of whose features is graven above, a sound and happy sleep till the day of awakening, and also the sleep of his servants, and of those of his race who, rising up after him, shall yet lay their heads as low." Footnote: the day of awakening. This phrase is remarkable, as seeming to indicate a belief in a future state. Editor. End of footnote. "Thou seest, O Holly," she said, "this people founded the city, of which the ruins yet cumber the plain yonder, 4,000 years before this cave was finished. Yet when first mine eyes beheld it 2,000 years ago, was it even as it is now? Judge therefore how old must that city have been. And now follow thou me, and I will show thee after what fashion this great people fell when the time was come for it to fall." And she led the way down to the centre of the cave, stopping at a spot where a round rock had been let into a kind of large manhole in the flooring, accurately filling it just as the iron plates fill the spaces in the London pavements down which the coals are thrown. "Thou seest," she said. "Tell me, what is it?" "Nay, I know not," I answered. Whereon she crossed to the left-hand side of the cave, looking towards the entrance, and signed to the mutes to hold up the lamps. On the wall was something painted with a red pigment, in similar characters to those hewn beneath the sculpture of Tisno, king of Kor. This inscription she proceeded to translate to me, the pigment still being fresh enough to show the form of the letters. It ran thus: I, Junis, a priest of the great temple of Kor, write this upon the rock of the burying place, in the year 4803 from the founding of Kor. Kor is fallen. No more shall the mighty feast in her halls, no more shall she rule the world, and her navies go out to commerce with the world. Kor is fallen, and her mighty works, and all the cities of Kor, and all the harbours that she built, and the canals that she made, are for the wolf and the owl, and the wild swan, and the barbarian who comes after. 25 moons ago did a cloud settle upon Kor, and the 100 cities of Kor, and out of the cloud came a pestilence that slew her people, old and young, one with another, and spared not. One with another they turned black and died, the young and the old, the rich and the poor, the man and the woman, the prince and the slave. The pestilence slew, and ceased not by day or by night, and those who escaped from the pestilence were slain of the famine. No longer could the bodies of the children of Kor be preserved according to the ancient rites, because of the number of the dead. Therefore were they hurled into the great pit beneath the cave, through the hole in the floor of the cave. Then, at last, a remnant of this the great people, the light of the whole world, went down to the coast and took ship and sailed northwards. And now am I, the priest Junis, who write this, the last man left alive, of this great city of men, but whether there be any yet left in the other cities I know not. This do I write in misery of heart before I die, because Kor the imperial is no more, and because there are none to worship in her temple, and all her palaces are empty, and her princes and her captains, and her traders and her fair women, have passed off the face of the earth. I gave a sigh of astonishment. The utter desolation depicted in this rude scroll was so overpowering. It was terrible to think of this solitary survivor of a mighty people, recording its fate before he too went down into darkness. What must the old man have felt as, in ghastly terrifying solitude, by the light of one lamp feebly illuminating a little space of gloom, he in a few brief lines daubed the history of his nation's death upon the cavern wall. What a subject for the moralist, or the painter, or indeed for any one who can think. Doth it not occur to thee, O Holly, said Asher, laying her hand upon my shoulder, that those men who sailed north may have been the fathers of the first Egyptians? Nay, I know not, I said. It seems that the world is very old. Old? Yes, it is old indeed. Time after time have nations, aye, and rich and strong nations, learned in the arts, been and passed away and been forgotten, so that no memory of them remains. This is but one of several. For time eats up the works of man, unless indeed he digs in caves like the people of Kor, and then mayhap the sea swallows them, or the earthquake shakes them in. Who knows what hath been on the earth, or what shall be? There is no new thing under the sun, as the wise Hebrew wrote long ago. Yet were not these people utterly destroyed, as I think. Some few remained in the other cities, for their cities were many. But the barbarians from the south, or perchance my people the Arabs, came down upon them, and took their women to wife, and the race of the Amahagga that is now is a bastard brood of the mighty sons of Kor, and behold, it dwelleth in the tombs with its fathers' bones. Footnote. The name of the race Amahagga would seem to indicate a curious mingling of races, such as might easily have occurred in the neighbourhood of the Zambezi. The prefix Ama is common to the Zulu and kindred races, and signifies people, while Hagga is an Arabic word meaning a stone. Editor. End of footnote. But I know not. Who can know? My arts cannot pierce so far into the blackness of time's night. A great people were they. They conquered till none were left to conquer, and then they dwelt at ease within their rocky mountain walls, with their manservants and their maidservants, their minstrels, their sculptors, and their concubines, and traded and quarrelled, and ate and hunted and slept, and made merry till their time came. But come, I will show thee the great pit beneath the cave, whereof the writing speaks. Never shall thine eyes witness such another sight. Accordingly I followed her to a side passage, opening out of the main cave, then down a great number of steps, and along an underground shaft which cannot have been less than 60 feet beneath the surface of the rock, and was ventilated by curious borings that ran upward, I know not where. Suddenly the passage ended, and she halted and bade the mutes hold up the lamps, and as she had prophesied, I saw a scene such as I was not likely to see again. We were standing in an enormous pit, or rather on the brink of it, for it went down deeper, I do not know how much, than the level on which we stood, and was edged in with a low wall of rock. So far as I could judge, this pit was about the size of the space beneath the dome of St. Paul's in London, and when the lamps were held up, I saw that it was nothing but one vast charnel house, being literally full of thousands of human skeletons, which lay piled up in an enormous gleaming pyramid, formed by the slipping down of the bodies at the apex as fresh ones were dropped in from above. Anything more appalling than this jumbled mass of the remains of a departed race I cannot imagine, and what made it even more dreadful was that in this dry air a considerable number of the bodies had simply become desiccated, with the skin still on them, and now, fixed in every conceivable position, stared at us out of the mountain of white bones, grotesquely horrible caricatures of humanity. In my astonishment I uttered an ejaculation, and the echoes of my voice, ringing in the vaulted space, disturbed a skull that had been accurately balanced for many thousands of years near the apex of the pile. Down it came with a run, bounding along merrily towards us, and of course bringing an avalanche of other bones after it, till at last the whole pit rattled with their movement, even as though the skeletons were getting up to greet us. "Come," I said, "I have seen enough. These are the bodies of those who died of the great sickness, is it not so?" I added, as we turned away. "Yea, the people of Kor ever embalmed their dead, as did the Egyptians, but their art was greater than the art of the Egyptians, for whereas the Egyptians disembowelled and drew the brain, the people of Kor injected fluid into the veins, and thus reached every part. But stay, thou shalt see." And she halted at haphazard at one of the little doorways opening out of the passage along which we were walking, and motioned to the mutes to light us in. We entered into a small chamber, similar to the one in which I had slept at our first stopping-place, only instead of one, there were 2 stone benches or beds in it. On the benches lay figures covered with yellow linen, on which a fine and impalpable dust had gathered in the course of ages, but nothing like to the extent that one would have anticipated, for in these deep-hewn caves there is no material to turn to dust. About the bodies on the stone shelves and floor of the tomb were many painted vases, but I saw very few ornaments or weapons in any of the vaults. Footnote: all the linen that the Haggard wore was taken from the tombs, which accounted for its yellow hue. It was well washed, however, and properly rebleached it acquired its former snowy whiteness, and was the softest and best linen I ever saw. L.H.H. End of footnote. "Uplift the cloth so, Holly," said Asher, but when I put out my hand to do so, I drew it back again. It seemed like sacrilege, and to speak the truth, I was awed by the dread solemnity of the place, and of the presences before us. Then, with a little laugh at my fears, she drew them herself, only to discover other and yet finer cloths lying over the forms upon the stone bench. These also she withdrew, and then for the first time for thousands upon thousands of years did living eyes look upon the face of that chilly dead. It was a woman. She might have been 35 years of age, or perhaps a little less, and had certainly been beautiful. Even now her calm, clear-cut features, marked out with delicate eyebrows and long eyelashes which threw little lines of the shadow of the lamplight upon the ivory face, were wonderfully beautiful. There, robed in white, down which her blue-black hair was streaming, she slept her last long sleep, and on her arm, its face pressed against her breast, there lay a little babe. So sweet was the sight, although so awful, that, I confess it without shame, I could scarcely withhold my tears. It took me back across the dim gulf of ages, to some happy home in dead imperial Kor, where this winsome lady girt about with beauty had lived and died, and dying taken her last-born with her to the tomb. There they were before us, mother and babe, the white memories of a forgotten human history speaking more eloquently to the heart than could any written record of their lives. Reverently I replaced the grave-cloths, and with a sigh that flowers so fair should, in the purpose of the everlasting, have only bloomed to be gathered to the grave, I turned to the body on the opposite shelf, and gently unveiled it. It was that of a man in advanced life, with a long grizzled beard, and also robed in white, probably the husband of the lady, who, after surviving her many years, came at last to sleep once more, for good and all, beside her. We left the place and entered others. It would be too long to describe the many things I saw in them. Each one had its occupants, for the 500 and odd years that had elapsed between the completion of the cave and the destruction of the race had evidently sufficed to fill these catacombs, numberless as they were, and all appear to have been undisturbed since the day when they were placed there. I could fill a book with the description of them, but to do so would only be to repeat what I have said, with variations. Nearly all the bodies, so masterfully was the art with which they had been treated, were as perfect as on the day of death, thousands of years before. Nothing came to injure them in the deep silence of the living rock. They were beyond the reach of heat and cold and damp, and the aromatic drugs with which they had been saturated were evidently practically everlasting in their effect. Here and there, however, we saw an exception, and in these cases, although the flesh looked sound enough externally, if one touched it, it fell in, and revealed the fact that the figure was but a pile of dust. This arose, Asher told me, from these particular bodies having, either owing to haste in the burial or other causes, been soaked in the preservative, instead of its being injected into the substance of the flesh. Footnote. Asher afterwards showed me the tree from the leaves of which this ancient preservative was manufactured. It is a low bush-like tree, that to this day grows in wonderful plenty upon the sides of the mountains, or rather upon the slopes leading up to the rocky walls. The leaves are long and narrow, a vivid green in colour, but turning a bright red in the autumn, and not unlike those of a laurel in general appearance. They have little smell when green, but if boiled the aromatic odour from them is so strong that one can hardly bear it. The best mixture, however, was made from the roots, and among the people of Kor there was a law, which Asher showed me alluded to on some of the inscriptions, to the effect that, on pain of heavy penalties, no one under a certain rank was to be embalmed with the drugs prepared from the roots. The object and effect of this was, of course, to preserve the trees from extermination. The sale of the leaves and roots was a government monopoly, and from it the kings of Kor derived a large proportion of their private revenue. L.H.H. End of footnote. About the last tomb we visited I must, however, say one word, for its contents spoke even more eloquently to the human sympathies than those of the first. It had but 2 occupants, and they lay together on a single shelf. I withdrew the grave-cloths, and there, clasped heart to heart, were a young man and a blooming girl. Her head rested on his arm, and his lips were pressed against her brow. I opened the man's linen robe, and there, over his heart, was a dagger wound, and beneath the woman's fair breast was a like cruel stab, through which her life had ebbed away. On the rock above was an inscription in 3 words. Asher translated it. It was, "Wedded in death." What was the life story of these 2, who of a truth were beautiful in their lives, and in their death were not divided? I closed my eyelids, and imagination, taking up the thread of thought, shot its swift shuttle back across the ages, weaving a picture on their blackness, so real and vivid in its details, that I could almost for a moment think that I had triumphed o'er the past, and that my spirit's eyes had pierced the mystery of time. I seemed to see this fair girl form, the yellow hair streaming down her, glittering against her garments snowy white, and the bosom that was whiter than the robes, even dimming with its lustre her ornaments of burnished gold. I seemed to see the great cave filled with warriors, bearded and clad in mail, and on the lighted dais where Asher had given judgment, a man standing robed, and surrounded by the symbols of his priestly office. And up the cave there came one clad in purple, and before him and behind him came minstrels and fair maidens, chanting a wedding song. White stood the maid against the altar, fairer than the fairest there, purer than a lily, and more cold than the dew that glistens in its heart. But as the man drew near she shuddered. Then out of the press and throng there sprang a dark-haired youth, and put his arms about this long-forgotten maid, and kissed her pale face, in which the blood shot up like lights of the red dawn across the silent sky. And next there was turmoil and uproar, and a flashing of swords, and they tore the youth from her arms, and stabbed him. But with a cry she snatched the dagger from his belt, and drove it into her snowy breast, home to the heart, and down she fell. And then, with cries and wailing, and every sound of lamentation, the pageant rolled away from the arena of my vision, and once more the past shut to its book. Let him who reads forgive the intrusion of a dream into a history of fact. But it came so home to me, I saw it all so clear in a moment, as it were. And besides, who shall say what proportion of fact, past, present, or to come, may lie in the imagination? What is imagination? Perhaps it is the shadow of the intangible truth. Perhaps it is the soul's thought. In an instant the whole thing had passed through my brain, and she was addressing me. "Behold the lot of man," said the veiled Asha, as she drew the winding sheets back over the dead lovers, speaking in a solemn, thrilling voice, which accorded well with the dream that I had dreamed. "To the tomb, and to the forgetfulness that hides the tomb, must we all come at last. Ay, even I who live so long. Even for me, O Holly, thousands upon thousands of years hence. Thousands of years after you hast gone through the gate, and been lost in the mists, a day will dawn whereon I shall die, and be even as thou art, and these are. And then what will it avail that I have lived a little longer, holding off death by the knowledge that I have wrung from nature, since at last I too must die? What is a span of 10,000 years, or 10 times 10,000 years, in the history of time? It is as naught. It is as the mist that roll up in the sunlight. It fleeth away like an hour of sleep, or a breath of the eternal spirit. Behold the lot of man. Certainly it shall overtake us, and we shall sleep. Certainly too we shall awake and live again, and again shall sleep, and so on, through periods, spaces, and times, from aeon unto aeon, till the world is dead, and the worlds beyond the world are dead, and naught liveth but the spirit that is life. But for us twain, and for these dead ones, shall the end of ends be life, or shall it be death? As yet death is but life's night, but out of the night is the morrow born again, and doth again beget the night. Only when day and night, and life and death are ended and swallowed up in that from which they came, what shall be our fate, O Holly? Who can see so far? Not even I. And then, with a sudden change of tone and manner, "Hast thou seen enough, my stranger guest, or shall I show thee more of the wonders of these tombs that are my palace halls? If thou wilt, I can lead thee to where Tisno, the mightiest and most valorous king of Kor, in whose day these caves were ended, lies in a pomp that seems to mock at nothingness, and bid the empty shadows of the past do homage to his sculptured vanity." "I have seen enough, O Queen," I answered. "My heart is overwhelmed by the power of the present death. Mortality is weak, and easily broken down by a sense of the companionship that awaits upon its end. Take me hence, O Asha." End of chapter 16.